What's up people, I'm Zarakane and I'm back with another load of leaks from the new Genestealer Cult's Codex. We're going to be looking at probably one of the biggest and most important changes that impacts everyone's list, which is of course the creeds. Now if you're new to the faction, creeds are basically our regiment choices, or like Space Marines that get chapters, or Orc clans, Tyranid Hive fleets or whatever, you get the picture. Now in the past we were at a really stupid disadvantage because the old Codex didn't let half of our units even benefit from the creed. It was just a downright kick in the balls. None of our vehicles, the Patriarch, the Pure Strain Genestealers, the Brood Brothers, none of it got to use the creed buffs. Well, I've got awesome news for you, and that is now the cult creeds apply to everything. Thank fuck, prayers answered. Obviously not Brood Brothers though, because you'll see they are actually gone from the Codex now, and are only accessible by bringing in a separate detachment direct from the Astra Militarum catalogue. But that is a small price to pay in my eyes for some of this cool shit. So I'm not going to piss around, let's hit this one hard and fast. First up, Twisted Helix. You all know I'm a massive fan and advocate of this creed. It's changed slightly, so we still get +1 strength, but instead of +2 to advance, we just get +1 to our move. So I'm actually pretty happy with that. Sure, it's not quite as far, but think about how much faster that makes everything that doesn't necessarily want to be advancing. You know, vehicles, for example, using heavy weapons. Now, here's the extra new part. Permanent transhuman on rolls of 1 or 2. So for anyone who doesn't know what transhuman is, you know, it means that anytime you get wounded, a 2 will always fail. I mean, obviously a 1 will always fail, but a 2 will now always fail. So that means anything that's toughness 3, for example, our neophytes, if they get wounded by something which would usually wound them on a 2, now no longer it cannot. It has to be a 3. That means, you know, that basically also blast weapons are going to be less effective against us. They're usually really high strength. Acolytes have already gone up to toughness 4, so it doesn't really matter quite so much for them. I mean, one thing off the top of my head which comes to mind is Volkites. You know, those things would usually be wiping us off the board, but now we've got a bit more defense against them. The Warlord trait, Bioalchemist, remains the same. So on your Patriarch, for example, you get flat 3 damage now on your claws, going up to flat 4 on wound rolls of 6. That's still sick. Or flat 3, think about this, on the Primus's new Bone Sword. Sadly, this trait no longer affects shooting weapons. You used to be able to put it on the Calamorph and his pistols. Now it's just melee only. The Relic. Okay, this part is nice. The Elixir of the Prime Specimen is back, and no longer is it what it used to do, which is +1 wound, +1 toughness, +1 attack. Instead, now it mirrors what the Biophacus can do. So the Biophacus now gives the injection goad buff to aberrants or core units. So for example, now he can inject it into acolytes. What this relic does is gives you the ability to choose one of his buffs and apply it to your warlord. He doesn't even have to be on the board as far as I can tell. However, if he is on the board, you get to choose 2 of those buffs. So, you know, usually you roll a d3 and that's your result. Now you get to just choose 2 of those results. And I'm just going to say that basically one of those is a 5+ feel no pain, and one of them is exploding 6s to hit. That is pretty fucking cool. The stratagem, specifically for aberrants, is monstrous biohorrors again. However, it's not as good as I first thought when I read it. So what you do is you add 1 to their attacks, but it makes all their weapons damage 1. So that's not as great as what I originally thought. In fact, it's pretty crap. I mean, why would I downgrade my hammers just to potentially slay an extra 1 wound model? There's also a little bit which is like basically if you slay a model, it counts as 2 in the morale phase to come, which I think A, people will just forget about, and B, still doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to lose loads of models. Mutagenic deviation is slightly different. Now it gives you automatic wounds on a hit roll of 6. I mean, that could be cool against some very tough units, I suppose. Okay, let's move on. Hive cool. So far everyone has been rumour milling these to be the next hot thing. I can somewhat see why, but I'm not fully convinced just yet. So let's look at the first bit, which hasn't really changed. Models can fall back and shoot with a hit penalty. Now, this used to be crap, but consider now vehicles can use it. All your trucks and ridge runners can now just fall back out of being tied up, and that is tasty. But the next part is new. It allows units to perform actions after advancing, and they can still shoot, which is great for jumping onto objectives normally just a little too far away, let's say a midfield flag, and planting a banner. But here's where it gets interesting. In my wishlist video months back, I suggested that Hive Cult would get something like, I don't know, exploding 6s like Scions can to represent their military prowess with autoguns and shit like that. And this new Warlord trait aura does just that. Note that it's only for core units though, so it's basically neophytes. Now, remember when people got anal about the new Tau railgun thing that ignores invulns? Well, get ready to indulge in our own version. Obviously not as ridiculous, but the Hive Cult Relic gives the bearer invuln ignoring melee attacks on wound rolls of 5 and 6. Now, the reason why this is actually kind of great is because now that the Patriarch's strength is only 5 and he re-rolls his own failed wounds, that basically gives you more chances of rolling a 5 or 6 second time round. Remember that those can be up to -6 AP too, so that is mental. The stratagem is kind of uninspiring. It basically lets you place a +1 to hit crossfire marker on a target without needing to get those initial hits on them first. It could be pretty helpful, I suppose, for buffing against things that are hiding behind terrain. Let's say if you've got to move around some ruins to get an angle on them with your Ridge Runners, let's say, then you just spend that and then you're going to get the +1 to hit buff. The psychic power is still Synaptic Blast. I'll let you read it yourself because I've never been a fan of this one. It's just a mortal wounds thing. Okay, let's get on to the Purphan Princess because they're probably considered the current meta creed to take. There's actually some really awesome stuff here. It's a little bit different, but vibe with me here. So before, they got rerolls on all the hits on the charge. Now they're just +1 to hit on the charge, and that's very nice. Don't forget that the Primus gives you reroll 1s, so if he's nearby, you're getting the best of both worlds. Also note that Aberrants don't suffer -1 to hit on the hammers anymore, so hammers hitting on 2s is on the menu. They also ignore below half strength on the morale tests, which the Patriarch grants in an aura, but it's nice to double up, I suppose, if he's not in your list. Now, next comes perhaps one of my favourite things in the book that I've seen so far. The Warlord trait is called Xenoprophet, and it links up with Unquestioning Loyalty. That rule, by the way, has not changed, which I'm so happy about. So basically, this trait allows the Warlord to auto-pass on the loyalty roll. Automatic Unquestioning Loyalty. That means, in theory, your character never ever takes damage unless he runs out of meat shields. And it also extends the range of it to 6 inches rather than 3, which is really good. And as an added bonus, it gives nearby units the ability to use that character's leadership like a Commissar or an Inquisitor. I mean, how fucking mad is that? Imagine having an unkillable Patriarch being flanked by 60 Neophytes who take all the shots for him. Okay, yes, you could say mega waste of Neophytes and the enemy just targets them all first. But the Relic 2 on this character could grant a 5+ invuln shield bubble to all of those meat shields, and there's ways to grant them feel no pains too with, say, the Biophagus. And even better, the psychic power Last Gas could be used on the meat shield guys, granting them a mortal wound kickback effect on whoever attacks them, like a deflection mechanic. Can't deny this is making me want to play Purphan Princess already. Their stratagem is still pretty situational though, it just lets you get +1 to wound against a unit that kills one of your characters. Sacrificial Locus, anyone? Okay, one that everyone's pumped for, Rusted Claw. The first part is not that good. Basically, AP -1 and -2 attacks are lowered by 1. Okay, that's so-so. However, these guys have inherited Bladed Cog's old ability to move and fire heavy weapons on your infantry without penalty. More specifically, all weapons are treated as remaining stationary when you move or advance. So it's almost like they're Talon Desert Raiders. You can even advance and fire heavy weapons, therefore. Let's get into the tastiest stuff, though, because the Warlord trait is hit rolls of 6, scores 2 additional hits. That's pretty mad. If you roll well with a Patriarch, that could get pretty silly. And that's not all, though, because it increases their AP by 1. As for the Relic, this one is totally new. It's called the Nomad's Mantle, and it gives them the ability to move and operate totally without limits. So casting psychic powers, shooting, charging, you can do all of this stuff after falling back. They can also move horizontally through terrain and other models, which is funky as hell. Basically, you can't ever get wrapped and trapped, you just keep jumping out of it. The stratagem is back, drive-by demolitions, slightly different though. Now it lets you throw 1 demo charge in the movement phase at any point during your move. So you could zip past someone and throw the demo charge, halfway along that travel distance. The demo charge itself always gets 6 hit rolls to make rather than having to roll a d6 to see how many first. I think that's pretty cool. One thing I haven't seen yet is ways to get more grenade throws per squad, like the old Grenadiers sort of stratagem. That's a bit of a letdown, I won't lie. One big new thing I've seen though is the psychic power Inescapable Decay, which is now no longer just for targeting vehicles only. It gives you +1 AP on melee and shooting attacks. So yes, now we can get AP -1 hand flamers, and if the target is considered to be exposed by the crossfire rule, then we're going to be getting +1 to wound and ignoring cover saves on them too. So that is fucking sick. Mega combo on max hand flamers unit right there. Just to be sure, so you guys know, Acolytes do get the crossfire keyword. Okay, let's do bladed cog. Now, I'm not sure, but thus far, I think this might be one of the weaker options, sadly. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's just not, quite as tasty. So note first of all that the heavy weapon movement penalty thing for your infantry, that went to Rusted Claw, so these guys are basically downgraded in that way. First of all, what they do get is still the 6-up invuln thing, but it no longer bumps up pre-existing invulns, like on the Patriarch, Kelemorph, Locust, or the Mark of the Clawed Omnissiah. So that means that as far as I can tell, the max invuln we can field is limited to 4 across the book. I might be missing something else, somewhere else in the Codex I haven't seen yet. So next, a squad can reroll 1 hit or wound roll per phase, which is pretty meh if you ask me. I mean, I suppose that's everything, gets to do it once. And lastly, the part I wasn't expecting, add 3 inches to ranged weapons, excluding grenades and demo charges. So that's not half bad for mining lasers and other shit that's usually 24 inches, goes up to 27. 2 things have stayed the same here. The Warlord trait, Single-Minded Obsession, that's still a reroll wounds against a chosen target aura. And the Mark of the Clawed Omnissiah is just the same as it was before. Shame we can't get it up to a 3+ invuln on an Abominant anymore. That is pretty sad. The stratagem is totally different. Overthrow the Oppressors is gone. Sad times. Instead, we get to apply a 5-up invuln to a squad of our choice. So you could get a 5-up on some Aberrants, for example. That's probably where you'd see the most utility in it. It's 1 CP or 2 CP if the power rating is above 6. So note that for a 10-man squad of Acolytes, it's 6 power level, so that would only be 1 CP for them. The psychic power's okay, I suppose. You cast it on a squad and they get +1 to their saves against damage 1 attacks, but very short range. They've got to be within 3 inches of the Psyker, I think. Not really too fussed with that yet, but I guess you could stack it on top of light cover. Not made up my mind on that yet. Okay, let's do the poster boys next. Cult of the Forearmed Emperor. I mean, let's face it, they needed it more than anyone because their old stuff was shit. First part, they get the Orcs rule, here we go, which is basically you just reroll failed charges. Not bad at all. I still probably wouldn't use it though. I'd rather just get into a position where I'm highly unlikely to fail in the first place. The good part, however, is permanent light cover outside of 12 inches against ranged shots. So if you stay at arm's length with the enemy, they're always going to be getting that cover save even if they're out in the open. I mean, it doesn't do anything if you're already in cover. The Warlord trait lets you reduce the cost of a stratagem by 1 once per round. So okay, that ain't half bad if you want to use something that's 2 CP, like counteroffensive, which you could potentially be doing many times in a game. Then there's a Plan Generations in the Making, which has sadly changed, and now it does the opposite of the trait, which is increasing your opponent's stratagem cost by 1. It only affects that stratagem once, but it does it for the rest of the game. So I'll definitely use that against, say, Transhuman Physiology or something that the opponent can do that really blunts our attacks. The Relic, Sword of the Forearmed Emperor, looks the same, almost 4 bonus attacks on the Primus or Locust Blades at -4 AP. As I've said before, this downgrades the Locust's blades from damage 2 to damage 1, so that's silly and still not really corrected. But this one auto wounds on hits of 6, not really impressed with this one. And lastly, the Psychic Power, Undermine, it's weaker now. It subtracts 3 from the enemy's move, 2 from their charges, and it halves their advances. Okay, that wraps up all of the main cults, so let's do the custom creeds, because these are different. In the old book, what we did is we had a list of them and you would choose a combination of 2. Now what you do is choose a combination of as many as you want, but each one has a cost. And the maximum you can spend is 4. So one thing might be 3 and one thing might be 1, or you could choose 4 traits that all cost 1. Let's take a look. The first one that costs 4, just ignore it. It's just a way to rename one of the core cults as your own. So that doesn't really do anything different. I'll fire off the other initial ones nice and fast because they're basically just parts stripped out of the main creeds that you can combo together in ways that you want. So Hunter's Instincts is reroll failed charges. Impassioned, add 1 to hit rolls on the charge, so that one's nice. Symbiotic Broodmind, you can fall back and shoot. Deep Supplies, you reroll 1 hit or 1 wound roll. Agile Gorillas, shoot as if you've remained stationary. Thralls of the Patriarch, ignore attrition modifiers on morale. Toxin Agents, hit rolls of 6 auto wound against infantry and bikers. Martial, infantry gets permanent +1 to hit like crossfire if they stand still. Very nice, but leaves you immobile. Accustomed to Toil, transhuman on a 1 or 2. Industrial affinity. This one's unique. Ignore all hit modifiers with industrial weapons, which I think is mining lasers, stuff like that, and rock cutters. That's an excellent way to counteract the only thing which still gets a -1, which is the rock cutter. Alien Fury, +1 to consolidate and pylons. War Convoy, feel no pain of 6 on all your vehicles and bikers. Synaptic Resonance, reroll 1s and 2s for psychic tests. It's kind of like a neurothrope. And lastly, Cold-Eyed Killers, improve the AP on wound rolls of 6 by 1. So I guess that's a way to kind of get that rending claw effect back. Now, that is absolutely everything. My God, there's still so much to cover, but it has given me a headache just trying to digest all of this information. So I hope you're all super pumped now, because I fucking am. Stay tuned for more. Hopefully what I can do is start putting out some of the data sheets next, and you can just make your own mind up on this stuff.